Hi, everyone. My name is Alia with Kernel. Thank you so much for coming. Vivek is also here as a steward. Back in March, we saw Nathalia, Lisa, and Livia give a presentation about their research that they spent a year doing and interviewing 41 token engineers. And I've recently developed a curiosity with like the token engineering study season coming out about token ecosystems, but they really kickstarted it for me. And so after seeing them give their awesome presentation there, I really wanted to bring it to Kernel to have conversations here, just learn more about it, open it up at an introductory level, because their research is like quite unprecedented in its scale, scope, and robustness. And yeah, it's also just awesome to have you three. We've had a relationship with you all, and we love working with you. So just hand it over to you, and excited to see what you have for us today.
Thanks so much, Alia. Yeah, we're very glad to be here. I think Kernel is the perfect audience to start digging deeper into the questions that came up from the study. So I will share my screen. Can you see it?
We can.
So what is token engineering? This is a question we were asking ourselves for quite some time. And because this is such a nascent field, there's so many questions unanswered. So we thought, who better to answer these questions than the people who are shaping this field? So we interviewed 41 participants across the globe. It was a pretty diverse crowd in terms of geographic spatial location, as you can see in this map. And they were participants that had all types of involvement with token engineering, from designing these tokens, from doing research, from being professors, from working in the many themes that compose this multidisciplinary field. So token engineering is a scientific and rigorous approach to building token-based systems. But what are tokens? I think we hear so much about tokens, but sometimes we don't dig deeper into what a token is. And a token is a representation of value. And in this case, we're talking about a representation of value in the blockchain. So tokens can be used in a variety of ways, and not only in a financial way, as sometimes we're more used to think about. So some of the uses of tokens are crowdfundings or funding mechanisms, or used as programmed as money, but also as social rights, and a variety of ways that social rights can be used. Also governance, reputation. So there are multiple uses of tokens, and because of their programmability, especially being in the blockchain, building token-based systems becomes a very complex endeavor. And sometimes those tokens are used with not just one use case, but many use cases built up on each other. So one token might have governance power and financial value and reputation association all within the same token. And then these designs need to happen in different ways, but existing simultaneously. So this makes things a little complex. And also, why engineering? Why token engineering? Engineering was seen, and as we heard from our participants, as a field that is rigorous and that has practices for providing safety for public infrastructure. So one example we heard a lot was the example of bridges. So we know bridges require engineering. We know they require care. We all know that other factors are involved in the construction, but at the end of the day, we all know we've driven over a bridge, even if we don't know how it works. We trust it. We trust the people we never will meet. Can we say that we trust the token systems that we are working with today? I don't know, some of them more, some of them less. But we had many examples of token systems failing on people, and people getting um, um, hurt by it in many ways. So how can we prevent that from happening, and how can building token systems and token engineering be a discipline that brings this rigor? That when it started with bridges in the past, they would do like trial and error to see what were the problems of a bridge, and imagine how disastrous that was for so long. Like how many people died, how many places were destroyed because of bridges falling, because of like, oh, I didn't know that needed to be in there. So how can we start to look at all of the systems that have been built and create that guide of best practices and of safety and security rigor that we can continue to improve on and to build upon, and to have this for the field? So just to make a little more tangible, what is the process of token engineering? It was quite difficult to put a finger on it at first, because some participants diverged on their thought of if is there even a linear process to token engineering. So this was the biggest coherence we had on these 5 steps, and they can happen linearly, and they can also happen non-linearly, as we were saying. The complexity of the field sometimes requires multiple iterations, and all of them can be happening in different stages simultaneously. So the process is first discover, then design, then implement, then verify and validate, and maintain. Here we have a table that gives a little bit more nuance to what this process entails. So design has to do with this initial scoping. It happens before the test net, so before you launch anything in the blockchain, and the key activities are the breakdown of requirements. So you need to understand what the client is bringing to you. What do they want to do with that system? What they want to see happening. You need to collect all the data from similar systems to see what has happened already, what has worked, what has not worked. You need to acknowledge your assumptions, and that's something very important, because the systems will be as good as the initial assumptions. So questioning those initial assumptions is important, and defining a clear scope for the token engineering project. So really knowing where you're going, what is the outcome you would like to achieve, and what is all the information you have starting. So the key quote from that, the key model, the models are only as good as the assumptions you have. Then the design phase, you start with modeling. So you start to bring all of that initial scoping into mathematical specifications, and to start to create models for this design, how it's going to look like, what are the goals of the system, or what are the metrics you're going to use. What is the incentive design? This is something we talk a lot about in token engineering. How do you incentivize the behavior you want to see happening for the outcomes you want to achieve, and how you propose these initial conditions and set the parameters so the scoping you have is going to work in the system. And you make technical choices. And the key question is, what behaviors should be incentivized to support the system goal? And then in implementation is when all of that modeling and the initial scoping, they become more refined computational representations. So you bring everything to the simulations, you start to build them, you start to observe, iterate, reiterate, adjust parameters. You start to see how things are behaving as you thought they were going to be behaving or not, and change accordingly. And the key question is, what are the formal specifications representing the system's intended operation. So is the math representing well the idea? And verification and validation was one of the steps that were shared as the most important for this process, because they are what brings the rigor. So if we want to have something safe, we need to check, validate. We need to validate not only our assumptions of the initial scoping, but we also need to verify that the system is safe. So it's a feasibility check and a safety check. What we planned, can this happen or not? So this is when smart contract audits happen, the incentive structure verification. Are the people that are going to be using the system, are they safe? How is this happening? And when also the token engineering audit happens, is the token in the system gonna behave well as we are intending? So is this system safe? What might transpire from here? And thinking of all possible attacks, and preparing for them. And then the maintenance is after mainnet. So after the process, the project is launched, how to continue improving on what's there, what happens after all the people get in touch with the system that was designed. So the key quote is, no plans survive contact with reality, and how to prepare for that. So was the product market fit achieved? Are the metrics useful? And this is where you start to analyze the data that was collected. So data and behavior analysis, validation with stakeholders. You start to listen from people and you start to improve upon suggestions. So this was a little bit a high level of what the token engineering process is. And from here, we wanted to open for you guys to hear some questions and to think about this question. What are the various uses of tokens? What uses are currently underrepresented? If anyone has some ideas that were not mentioned of how do you see tokens being used, or what do you think are some limitations of tokens, or what some uses of tokens are not are underrepresented? Yes, TP.
Hi, sorry I didn't have my camera on earlier. I was finishing up working on an application for the Ethereum Protocol Fellowship Cohort 5 to be a core dev. And I'm like writing 5 pages of the what motivates you. I was like, it's an open-ended question. And they said, say whatever you want to tell us why we should choose you. So they could skip it. Anyway, so I was like doing that and this came up and I didn't want to be distracted. So first of all, thank you for doing this. I'm so excited. Like I'm a smart contract writer, but I haven't been able to really research this because it doesn't really exist as far as I didn't really know it was a term. So I'm super glad. And I think I've seen Livia's speech before at like in East Denver a while ago, and about like how you should think about these systems, how do they nurture instead of like what do you want to take. And when you were talking about the key questions of token design, it got me thinking about my current project. So you're asking this question, is it appropriate if I share like I'm in a hackathon right now and we are doing something and we have tokenomics is the main mission, and the team that's working on it is not my team. I sort of nurture us having 4 teams that interdepend on each other a little bit, but mainly do their own thing. One of the teams is trying to come up with a cohesive model for us. Is it appropriate? Can I share? It's pretty simple. There are 3 different use cases, but I don't want to feel like I'm shilling something that doesn't exist because it doesn't exist. Is it?
I think it's fine.
Okay, so a year and a half ago, I did a hackathon and we had this simple idea about Dungeons and Dragons, that it's a old game that has like the worst user experience possible in modern tech terms. It's like takes like 1,000 times longer than a video game version of the same thing, but it's super amazing and magical and storytelling device, and it's a $4 billion industry. So I was like, what if we could tap into some of blockchain and AI and help make faster character sheets, like save people time. That was the hackathon idea. A year and a half later, we grew from 3 people and now we have like 45 contributors. And we're oriented around art, tech, and games. So we use these things to make the experience better, and we build a community. So after all this time, we don't have any tokens. We don't have barely any rules. We have some governance principles, and we're all about ethics, and how can we use art and technology to help artists get paid to draw things, because nothing, even AI can't touch like a human artist. So the art token, in my mind, is used as an investment token to invest in art or buy commissions from an artist. And I was thinking it should be fixed at a price, so that the price of a commission, people aren't undercutting each other. It's just there's one price. And then there's the games token, which you can use to pay for a D&D game in our club with our game masters. And the tech token would be like used as a subscription for the app, and the tech DAO or something would be a protocol DAO. But like, that's all I've got so far. And I have no idea, like I took the same screenshot of the last slide and I'm pasting it in my hackathon group chat going, hey, can we do this? So I don't know if I answered the question or I helped or distracted, but thank you.
I think it gave good places to start. TP, I think like what I wrote in the whiteboard is about different basically game design mechanics and artist tokens, like let's say rewarding artists. One of the specific ones that is obviously controversial on some points these days are meme coins, but in surface of being scientific and maybe a bit rigorous, the thing that I noticed from the 2 meme coins, Enjoy and Degen, that seem to have gained a bit of traction is at least some interesting incentive models. So for example, it's like tipping on channels that already exist, Farcaster and Zora in the 2 respective cases. The way that the game works is that the allowance of your tip amount on a day-to-day basis seems to change based on whether you've tipped regularly. So as you tip more and more regularly, you get a larger allowance. It depreciates if you don't use it, which has mixed effects, I think. I think I've heard people complain about the fact that they missed one day of tipping artists or tipping whatever people on Farcaster, I guess, and then they lost their allowance. So there was some mixed results when reality hit there. But there do seem to be these like subcultures that are building around how to use it well and kind of like norms. Degen maybe less so. Enjoy seems like Seed Club is quite involved in the early feelings of like how it's being used on Zora, and obviously there's lots of artists there. Early in the talk, when it was described, I heard funding mechanisms, social rights, governance, programmability. We put those all in the whiteboard. There's also, like storage tokens from like the AR and Filecoin world. There's obviously, I guess, like Ethereum might be like a gas tokens. Maybe there's others that people could add to this list. I don't have an answer in my head on currently underrepresented, although I would love to hear, because I feel like there's so many good things that could come out of that that question, what uses or tokens are currently underrepresented?
And also, for the sake of time, because we have quite a lot and 2 more questions coming. I would love if something comes to your mind right now, for you to take a note, and then in the last 10 minutes, we can come back, because there might be other information that comes from Lisa and Natalia that sparks like, oh, I thought of that first question now, and I want to add on. So I'd like to pass to Lisa.
Wonderful. Thanks, Livia. It's a pleasure to be here. I love this whole concept of the underrepresented needs, because one of the things that we, as far as use cases go, but as far as lots of things go, one of the things that we were really adamant about digging into with these 41 token engineers was this big overarching question of what is token engineering, but also we had these subset questions of what do their daily practices look like? You know, are they already using AI? Yes, they are. Are they expecting to use it even more in the future? Yes, they are. Do they think it will replace their job? No, they don't, but it will extend their work. So we had all these ideas around practices. And one of the beautiful gifts that came out of that was what Livia just shared with you, which was that there really isn't a lot published yet on the end-to-end process. A lot of people look at a snippet or look at one stage or phase of the process. And so getting it a little bit more clear of what does it look like. And you know, it's not a linear step-by-step, you're often revisiting these various phases as you go throughout. Just trying to unearth that was a very meaningful effort that came from our study. The other couple of things that we really wanted to dig into was what are the practices of these token engineers or people who are really working adjacent to this space? Because a lot of our interviewees didn't even self-identify as a token engineer just yet, because the field is still so emergent and growing. The other areas were around what are the needs and what are the challenges. And the two of those actually tended to echo each other in a lot of ways, that what people were being challenged with was then what they wanted to address with what their needs were. But there were 3 big needs that really emerged from our data set that we wanted to highlight for all of you and consider with all of you. And the biggest thing that I would share is that first and foremost, above all this, we knew that a level of care was important. You know, tokenomics was mentioned before. Often people are wondering what's the difference between tokenomics and token engineering or crypto economics. Where does all this fit? And ultimately, you know, tokenomics was something that people saw as potentially limiting in the sense that it alludes to the economics and therefore the financialization of tokens, whereas the token-based systems can be broader than that. And so token engineering brings what a number of our interviewees mentioned as a need, which was to potentially bring more rigor to make sure that our bridges are safe and people are accountable for building, you know, the digital bridges of the future world. And so that almost a need was that creed of do no harm or that ethical slant. And so the big 3 needs that surfaced from the study were standards, education, mentorship, and social infrastructure. And Natalia will get into the social infrastructure aspect, particularly ethics, is what we'll highlight from that at the end of our time together. But I wanted to touch on standards and education before we get there. So standards in and of themselves were something that was considered a deep need. And you'll see one of our participants shared this quote of where are people analyzing the things that fail and the things that are succeeding? Like it just doesn't exist and it needs to. And I think that's also a sentiment that was shared by a number of our participants, is that we can only go as far as what we know is working well and try to avoid the things that aren't doing well. Oh, good. I see people going into the chat. Please consider putting examples in the chat as you see questions come up on the slides, because one of the things that I love about the Kernel community and I loved about participating in this research project was it really did elevate more questions for this emerging field and space and how it's, I think, profoundly impacting the future of the entire Web3 space. All of us rely on these token-based systems, upholding a level of rigor and hopefully a level of safety for the people using them. So the biggest thing that came out of the standards discussion was almost a precursor to this, that in order for us to even develop what are some of the standards, we need to be building libraries and sandboxes. And the libraries and sandboxes language is very intentional. Libraries of just what is even out there. A lot of people, you know, as already mentioned by Tippy, it's hard to even find what's out there, if it even exists yet. And so helping more research into this space, more people do studies, and as we learn about the space and develop cases to not just let those die on a vine, but to really consolidate and give credence to a consolidation of these great insights, and not just the things that are working well, but also the things that are totally bombing and not doing well whatsoever. And so that's just something that the library aspect became very, very important. We know we need that in this space. The sandboxes space was equally important. A lot of our ability to even create those case studies of the future depends on our ability to have a lower barrier of entry into how we play in the space of token engineering. As you can imagine, token engineering has like different grades, almost like levels of complexity. So if you're going to build a new L1 blockchain, you know, like the next Ethereum, you are probably going to need a whole team that does that end-to-end process that Livia shared, and that in fact each one of those phases might have a team of specialists devoted to doing it really well. Whereas if you're looking at like a layer 3 dApp that you're looking to build, maybe there's one person who can be that consult thought partner to you that can help you take it end to end. And so it really, there's these different gradations of what's needed. And yet in a lot of those scenarios, the bar is high and the cost is high to even test it out. And so our goal is to create more sandboxes where people can test, learn, iterate, fail, and do that well. And so one of the questions that we had coming out of this space that I'd invite you to think about rhetorically, I do have a question we'll discuss together, but what does a successful token engineering outcome look like? How do we know? And what criteria or metrics should we be using to even evaluate that? And so again, this is such an emergent space, an emergent discipline that really in 2019 started taking a bit more shape. And so for us, we want people to be asking these questions more and more. Even our participants said when they got into the space, a lot of them have been in the space for quite a long while, since the very beginning. And a lot of them mentioned that they actually had all these hopes for the diverse token-based systems thinking. And instead, we've kind of almost gone the opposite way of narrowing it to doing a lot of copy paste of DeFi protocols. And that's not because we're not creative or not seeing the possibilities, but more so because those are some of the cases we have. Those are the things in the libraries and the things that we can more easily pull from. So how do we expand that out and continue to ask bold questions? Okay. And then we can go on to the next big need. So there's obviously standards that we need to bring in, but there's also education. And education, especially when it comes to places like Kernel, I think this is so ripe of a space for contemplating these big, bold questions that then people put into concrete application. The biggest thing that we heard around education was that there's a lot of work to be done because it's still so new. There's not a lot of resources for people to pull from. So again, foundationally, when we get those libraries and sandboxes, it allows us to build standards, and those standards then allow us to educate people on those standards. So there's a flow to this that we see is worth plotting down that path. You can see this lovely quote from Simon, something that the entire space is kind of neglected and that I'm starting to pay attention to more, which I think is very important, that needs to be surfaced more, is that over time, as this technology has existed, it has built up history and provenance about how things have happened. And we have this record of stuff that has happened, and that needs to more and more over time become the primary selling point of why this technology matters. And this was one of the golden nuggets of our study, was that the blockchain space really affords in time an even richer look at history. Because as we go on, we can see that we have all of this great history built up, and it's something concrete to educate from. It's also something for us to educate others on of why this space matters and why token engineering and putting things on chain, having systems be on chain, can be really helpful to how we actually look at data and look at how history and life is taking place going forward. And so there's many interesting aspects to provenance that could be a whole session in and of itself. And I'd encourage you, if this is a curiosity of yours, to look into our study further. There's a lot of good insights that are written up about it. And if we move on to the next one, this is, when we consider the needs around education, one of the big things we had to consider as researchers is what role do our assumptions play in the quality of token engineering outcomes. It was very clear that a lot of the people, the token engineers, spent a lot of time really thinking through what their work was and what they were doing. They spent time, like one of them that I love, was just, I spend a lot of time in a hammock, and like that was part of their process. And I think it said a lot about the fact that this isn't just something you necessarily jump into. One of our other participants said, like, when do you need a token? When no other thing will work. And so a lot of people really viewed token engineering as something where, if you need, the only way to get the behaviors to happen are for the incentives to be in a token-based system, then you need a token-based system. But that you want to be so thoughtful about what you are doing and why, and does it make sense to be in this way? And I just think that's really powerful from an inquiry standpoint. And Andy, one of Kernel's very own, was one of our participants and interviewees, and he talked about, like, ultimately that what we're trying to do is bring a level of care to the space and just this added thoughtfulness to what we're doing when we design and talk about token-based systems. And so I think overall, one of the biggest needs we saw was this flow of having these libraries and sandboxes that move into us being able to build standards, that move into us being able to educate about it. But ultimately, we want to still have high curiosity and keep bringing this notion of care. And that's where we kind of get into this third part that Nathalia will lead into on the social infrastructure aspect, but particularly ethics and the role that might play in the future of token engineering. But before we do that, want to just pause on this needs notion and ask a question to the group. So let me see here. I love all the stuff coming in the chat. That's great. And then Livia, I think you can move on to the next. Yeah, so one of the things that we were curious about from this group in particular, and anybody watching this later, is to really consider your needs with token systems. And how do you currently interact with token systems? And what are some of the things that you wish you knew about, or wish you had known, perhaps, when you've been interacting with them? So feel free to put things into the chat, or raise your hand, or continue to contribute to Figma. Whatever works. Someone say hackathon. I love that. Yeah, these are great. I'm gonna have to save the chat. Frameworks would be helpful. Yeah.
I shared a screenshot, or like a flow chart that I made last night when I was trying to engineer an auction contract where we, like Dungeons and Dragons, a random character is created every day, and the price goes down. And I tried to think, like, I didn't have your chart yesterday, so I like was just like, well, what's fun, and it's like, well, you don't want the price to keep going up, and then you want the character but you don't get it. That's not really fun. So I just learned about Dutch auctions, and it goes downwards from a high price, and I was like, oh, and then we could have randomness, and it starts at a random multiplier based on the rarity of the character. Anyways, So I shared this flow chart, and the reason I was doing it is that was sort of a need I had. Was I went into Excalidraw and I was like, hey, AI, make this flow chart. And it was awful at it. And then I had to sit there with one of my teammates for like 40 minutes editing it and changing it. And it maybe saved us time to have some boxes that were right to start off with. But it was a whole process. So yeah, I feel like just design phase and discovery, all that stuff, there's no infrastructure for us really, other than like Open Zeppelin has a wizard that you can go in there for ERC20s or whatever, and it has like a chat box now. But anyways, yeah, this I am gonna connect with Livia after, and we maybe could do a hackathon about this stuff, because I'm literally designing a hackathon right now, and governance is one of the 5 quadrants. And token, not maybe we should replace that with token engineering. But anyways, thank you.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. Yeah, it's incredible kind of the needs that people expressed. Like a lot of people really weren't even sure what token engineering was, or whether it was one person are they looking for, or are they looking for a whole team? Where do you even find those teams? So a lot of this stuff is still at its great infancy. And yet one thing when we asked what people saw in the future of the next like 1 to 3 years is people saw, you know, academic programs, but also like native Web3 programs that could really skill people up, like Token Engineering Academy already does phenomenal work in this space. But there's all these like great needs for people to even be able to sort through like what's needed, or to have language of the end to end, and to even see it. I think for a lot of people in Web3, we tend to use a lot of different language, sometimes across different ecosystems, to describe similar things. And really, it's about trying to come together to understand like what are the resources even available, and how do we start studying and documenting these emergent aspects of the work we're doing, just so we can take that beautiful snapshot and see that history unfolding. Wonderful. With that being said, I'll turn things over to Nathalia to talk a little bit more about ethics.
Thank you, Lisa. And I love your reaction, TP, the ethics. Because yes, ethics and token engineering, just how we are witnessing how hard it is and how hard it can be to define token engineering. We ask also, how can we define what ethics is in a complex system? I'm looking now at, for example, the Code of Ethics for the National Society of Professional Engineers, and they say that for engineering, it's expected for you to uphold the safety, welfare, and health of the society at all times, be truthful and honest, offer services in their areas of expertise only, be honest with their clients, be responsible, treat all people with fairness and respect, and use their knowledge and skills for the improvement of humanity. So when we look at token engineering and Web3 systems in general, I mean, how do we ensure safety of users? We used the bridge analogy earlier in the presentation. And yes, when you're crossing a bridge, you can look at how someone needs to be able to cross the bridge, but do you look also at who's able to cross that bridge, how that bridge has been built? And for example, in the study, one of our participants mentioned how in some places, like bridges that are built at a certain height, so buses and public transportation cannot go through a certain area of the city, right? So just like that, there are so many nuances and just more and more complexity that emerges if we're looking at systems that involve economics and social elements. So we believe that it's really important for us to go beyond the moral questions Because of course, just as another participant mentioned, with every new technology, there are new moral questions. But then how do we go beyond what's right or wrong, since it's really hard to define what's right or wrong, right? So something that came up in the study is that we need spaces to look at the context that we're working with. How can we anchor our work in context? How can we do that if we are also building across all these different use cases, all different contexts, and how can we have more spaces for dialogue and also for failure? Because we need to learn from failure, as just like Lisa mentioned, this need for provenance and libraries of knowledge. So how do we build infrastructure for that as well? And how do we keep that in mind as a way to orient our work? Because yes, a lot of complexity will continue to emerge, new questions will continue to emerge, and a lot of questions that we probably will really not know the answer. So I really love the concept of orientation. How can we continue to reorient ourselves as these different externalities come up and as new dilemmas emerge? And speaking of dilemmas, I really like how Ponzi schemes were brought up by some participants. So yeah, do you think that Ponzi schemes can be ethical? Some of them thought that yes, if you are being transparent. And others thought that no, by no means Ponzi schemes can be ethical. So that's a huge question. And I think that in Web3, a lot of times we focus on the importance of transparency, but to which extent is transparency enough? Are we looking at accessibility and ways in which that transparency is going to be read and used and even metabolized? Like we can't expect to know how someone is going to read a piece of information and if they're going to really know how to act responsibly and in their favor in front of that information. So yeah, we believe that it's a really key liability that, like, for a token engineer to relate to that information asymmetry that can emerge from the use of token systems. And yeah, I love this quote as well, which looks at what we're building, because as part of ethics, it can also be important to, as I mentioned before, like to be anchored in context. And part of being anchored in context means also to look at what is real here, what's real in what we're building. What are some of the use cases? And instead of just focusing on making money, one of the participants mentioned that it's really important to feel that they're building something that's really solving a real problem. So a lot more questions emerged from the ethics topic, but we wanted to ask you, what role do you think ethics play in token engineering and token-based systems? And also, how can ethics go beyond safety and manipulation and accessibility concerns? So curious if anyone has thoughts or experiences that you want to share with us.
Well, I mean, I love this. I've been sending lots of screenshots. One of our teams is called the Ethical Art Robot. So the concept is, how do you make AI art that is ethical? What does that even mean? How could it be ethical? You don't know what people are going to read into it. Oh, AI, that's automatically, maybe it's just out of the box, it's unethical to some people. But our team and the partner who's working on this, he is basically saying the token is the ethics. This is how we bring ethics into it. We track where did that AI get the pictures from? Like, can we ethically source the images from consenting artists? Okay, now can we distribute the money that comes in? So we have to charge money for this picture because people are asking for pictures, right? It's a problem. So we're solving the problem. But if we just give people free AI pictures, we're actually doing harm to artists who might be trying to get a commission for that picture. So he's trying to work with artists and train an AI that draws in their style to get them more commissions. Meaning like, yes, maybe there's a little passive income generated from this AI stuff, but the end goal, so his thought process is around the end goal of these tokens should be the ethics, empower, like how do we give equity to the artists? How do we make it easier rather than harder? And often having a blockchain token makes it harder for like an artist because then they have to download MetaMask and whatever. But the more you build abstractions on top of that, the better it gets. So I'm thinking about games and how there's like innate ethics into a game because it's consensual and everybody should be having fun in a game. And you can't, if you design a game and it's not fun, and then you keep people playing in the game, it's unethical because they're like, I'm trying to get out of this game. It's terrible. And you're like, no, you're trapped.
Yeah, and I think that I agree that the token is the ethics is a hot concept, as Livia said. And also I wonder as we raise the level of abstraction in systems, how can that also compose with higher levels of what's concrete? What are the externalities of those abstractions and how those abstractions relate to each other? What are the relationships that people building these systems have with the systems that they're being built on top of? And that feels so important, in terms of just how can we increase the ratio of relationship of subjects and objects in a system. So yeah, I think there's so much to unearth and talk about in regards to this. Thank you for that. And I love, talking about AI and ethics is definitely a very fecund soil.
There's a bit more, Natalia, in the chat. Elena says, economically rational is how I think of most blockchain-based, token-based systems shape their ethical principles. She loved the framing. The tokens are the ethics from Tippy.
Go
ahead.
Yeah. Yeah. My toddler just left for daycare. So with ethics, I was looking at the phases of the process and trying to see like where that was from an earlier slide, like kind of where in this table ethics can be highlighted. And I think a lot of how I see like questions of ethical or unethical or Ponzi scheme or scam projects, it usually comes up with like a misunderstanding or a misalignment of the stated incentives and the actual like outcome. So like, okay, the like blockchain is a neutral decentralized system where all the participants are economically rational, and therefore like the most financially rewarded decision is the right one or is the fair one. And I think I'm curious if MEV came up at all in in these discussions because or in your research, because like that minor extractable value is kind of one of those edge cases where, okay, this is not really something that the designers of the network had in mind originally, but it is something that is completely quote unquote fair within the design of the token, or the token economics. So economically rational. This is, I don't know that I have like a set definition for it, but it's kind of one of those like 101 principles where like the miners will, it's you're more financially rewarded if you behave honestly than if you cheat the system, and you're rewarded in these tokens. Yeah, I don't know if that fits. Maybe there's a better term for what I'm describing.
Thank you, Elena. And first, to answer your question around the process, Livia, I wonder if we can go back to that slide, because ethics really, like, it's something that I believe is an overarching element of the process, because it can have many like different ways of engaging with this process. If we look at discovery itself, like when you are listening, let's say that you are an engineer, you're a designer working with token systems. If you are listening to your client and you come up, and let's say that they're asking you to build a Ponzi scheme, how do you relate to that? How do you ask yourself if that's ethical or not? Then within the implementation phase, as you start to look at specifics, and maybe you come across, I don't know if the implementation itself will have many examples, but I'm sure we could think of some. But especially with verification and validation, when you start looking at either some of the consequences of a token system or different forms of feasibility, I'm sure, many times I have come across different questions of whether or not the system was safe, or if it was considered for me ethical in terms of guaranteeing the quality of that service to the users. What is it really working towards? So yeah, I think it really ethics can flow between the different phases. And MEVs didn't really come up during the interviews, but I think it is like, it's one element that can be looked at and analyzed, but there are so many other ways, I think, depending on the systems and contexts that we're building with.
Yeah, I agree. I like this chart as kind of like a heat map, because there are some columns where you'll have more opportunities to explore and disclose and confirm the ethical framework of a given team, because different teams have different, and I'm not a philosopher, so I don't know kind of where people fall in terms of like the there's like a different set of ethics, or there's just like one kind of code that everyone falls by. But what I meant with the economic, like that tied to like an economically rational actor, which is what I kind of heard a lot when I first started learning about this technology. So for one group of researchers and builders, a Ponzi scheme might be ethical as long as it's disclosed like what the incentives of the network are. And like you kind of are, and like, because it can be defended by like, okay, the most economically rational, like as long as everybody's acting in that way, it falls under what's fair, and that's codified by the ethics of the system. And then it's just a game, it's like more of a finite game that you're playing where there are winners and then ultimately there's a loser. And I think many kind of degens like are aware that that's a design, like that's a that's the way that the systems they interact with participate, and it's part of the game. You just don't want to be the loser. You're kind of playing chicken, or you're playing kind of rock, paper, scissors. But then for other games or other networks, like that's the antithesis of what they're trying to design. They're trying to design like a money system or a loyalty program. And to have that feature of like a Ponzi is really bad. It's really something you want to avoid. It's an anti-pattern, or not anti-pattern. But so that's where I think like overlaying ethics onto this chart would be helpful, because a lot of engineers maybe don't have a philosophy background, and so it's not questions that they know to ask.
Yes, yes, totally. And something that also came up, and that is part of the report, is the need of guiding principles. So Danilo, someone that we interviewed, said, what's definitely missing in the field is some kind of analogous to the Hippocratic Oath in medicine. And so, yeah, how do we have some of those principles that help us better orient ourselves through this process? And I mean, we mentioned that standards and a library of knowledge is important, and something to look back to the mistakes. I think this is another thing, to continue to bring up in hackathons. Why can't we include more of that, and even have have a question first around guiding principles before we start the hackathon. So, and again, those are all they are concepts that depend on context. So again, this is an invitation to open those conversations with dialogue, and how it is hard to really define what's right or wrong here. So yeah, that's why we're so excited to also have this space and to be in conversation with you all, because one of the primary goals of this study is for it to continue to instigate more questions, more research, and hopefully the development of some of the needs that emerged during our research process. So
I wanted to quickly add something too, that is in this ethical mismatch that can happen. One participant mentioned, for example, I didn't want to be working on Ponzi schemes, but I need the money, and the projects that are hiring me are Ponzi schemes. So I think there's also the need for funding mechanisms that can be tied to a deeper sense of ethics, or at least wanting to prepare that space. And we have a lot of those on the like Gitcoin, Give It, and in the open source funding space. But I think it could be even more explicit to bring ethics and to bring this guiding principles into it. So people that are designing the systems, because I think this Elinor Ostrom also talks about this rational fallacy, that we think that individuals are always having rational behavior. And most of the times that is not true. We are very much guided by passions and by feelings and by emotions, and they are often not taken into consideration. So when we are designing, we think about those things in the discovery phase as like acknowledging the assumptions can also look like that. Like, am I assuming that actors are going to be behaving rationally and not based on their emotions and on their feelings? And if I assume that, how can I communicate to the people that are going to be using the system that I am assuming that they are going to behave in that way? So I think that ties on the monitoring phase and the discovery phase to like inform the design process, and also in the maintenance to have that data analysis to see, okay, is what we intended is what is actually happening? And if it's not, how can we make this known for everyone that is involved?
We have more questions and also more spaces for questions, but Alia, I'm wondering how we're doing on time and
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I mean, I have time to go over. I want to respect your time, of course. We only, booked y'all for an hour. So, yeah, you tell us. I can hang out and stay on. I don't know if you have 5 more minutes or if there are some more questions.
yeah.
I have one as well,
Mhm.
but I will defer also to the audience. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
It-
So
it
if
does-
anyone has
5 minutes is
general,
okay? Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much. This has been so great. I'm like deep. It's hard for me to listen because I've been in the chat, so I haven't been like registering everything. But I do have an example that I've been wondering about recently for a token. But if anyone else has something that they would like to ask, I mean, Ash, you've been commenting a bit. I don't know if you'd like to ask.
Yeah, I had a question about the product market fit side of things, because it's something I've been thinking about quite a bit lately. And I was curious as to how some of the engineers or the builders approach that. The challenge being that you may think that you need the token to get to product market fit, but the problem is if you launch early on with the token, you don't know if you actually have product market fit or if it's mostly people using your product because of the token. So there's that kind of conflict between like launching the token early and finding product market fit first.
Yeah, that's definitely also something that varies a lot, and that also has no right or wrong way, and it depends so much on what the values are for that group. What are you prioritizing? Are you looking at the longevity of the system, or you want to like launch soon, have profit soon? So I think this would be something really helpful to include in a set of guiding principles or guiding questions. I like guiding questions more than guiding principles, and something that can help developers, engineers, designers, just to look at as they're starting to build and launch. Something else that came up with that's kind of related to product market fit is also related to diversity and inclusion, because someone mentioned that if you are building token systems that you want to like be huge, are you also looking at some of the major countries that are using token systems right now? Like, are you looking at India, Africa, Latin America, and are you including people from those places in your teams? Instead of just interviewing them and asking for what they want, are you including them in the design process? Are you including them as engineers and in leadership roles? So I thought that was a really important way of asking that question as well.
And Natalia, just to build on that quick, like a distinction that was made was going from sometimes we can design for a group, and like Natalia said, it's like you're doing something for someone, but then there's with where you include them and it's more participatory and how you might co-design the solution, but then there's designing by where you yourself are the user. And I was a founding member of Talent DAO, and we were social science researchers doing social science on DAOs as a DAO. So we were benefiting from our research because we ourselves were researching ourselves and researching others for the benefit of the space. And so I think there's something about when you're in this space thinking through, when am I designing for, when am I designing with, and can I potentially like move down this spectrum to be designing by and really including the voices that matter and that would benefit most from the solution. And the product market fit question, I agree with Natalia. We heard from our interviewees lots of varying degrees, but that was the need for the sandboxes, is people wanted to test out their product market fit before it meant going fully on chain. So that was another note I'd add there.
Oh, thank you. Just to respect everyone's time, I think if it's okay, we'll just take one last question from Winter, who's raising their hand. Is that okay with you guys? Yeah, okay, thank you so much. And then we'll wrap. And I would love to, there seems like a lot of interest and questions. I would happily set up a follow-up call for anyone else who's interested. Just react to my message in the chat and I will contact everyone. Please go ahead, Winter. You're muted, Winter, if you're speaking. Okay, maybe they're not available to be on their mic anymore, or can put it in chat. I guess this is a good place to close if you're not around, Winter, to ask your question.
I think it might be good to wrap since we're 10 minutes over. But I just want to say thank you to all three of you, the Figma board, the chat. There's lots of great thoughts that I think have been spurred thanks to your efforts. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a real pleasure to go into this a little deeper with you guys.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And also just an invitation, because we, as part of the process of this study, we're launching a series of token engineering dialogues to just like dive deeper into the report and the questions that emerged from it. So we'll be sharing more of that on Twitter. We can also keep in touch via the email in the TE website that was shared here in the beginning. I'll share it again in the chat. So yeah, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.